Uh, Thank you, Jace. Our next speaker is Shreyas. He runs a website called nh7.in. If you haven't seen it, it's really cool. It's a lot of information also about the Indo music scene, generally music scene locally, Indian bands and so on. And he used to run a radio station. Still runs or used to run? It still runs, called Radio Verve. He also does some hacking on GNOME and evolution and whatnot, open source. So, Shreyas.
I'm going to get trolled on stage too. If HTML5 is the flash killer, then it has to be Ming, right? Like, because Ming is the resistor of flash code. Huh? Yeah, for sure, man. We could punch each other depending on how we think and stuff. Like fighting. Okay. Now that all of you are awake because of the gorgeous looking girl on stage. So, a little bit of backup on why I'm talking here. I run a website called NH7, which we just launched. The idea of the website is to give people a chance to discover new music. Unlike what he said, it won't just be Indo-indie music, it'll be all sorts of music. As a part of releasing that, we wrote a bunch of multimedia stuff, which uses HTML5, audio and a video player. Although in theory, audio and video is like the simplest elements of HTML5, there's small intricacies and how to go about doing it, which we discovered, which I'm going to run through. I'm going to be actually showing a window of Emacs and trying to run through code. Please tell me if at any point of time it just gets a little too much. I somehow lose drift when I'm looking at code. Okay, so this is my broad agenda for today. The idea was to sing, dance and show Mary, because we can't really make Mary because procreation is still not a part of HTML5 spec. Although local storage is getting close. So the idea with sing was to show you audio. The idea with show Mary was to show you video. And the idea with dance was to show you some examples of trying to build something which is visual. So that will be like canvas plus SVG. So we're doing some demos and showing you how we put stuff together. So we start with the dance part, right? So this is the simplest canvas. How many of you have played around with canvas? Everyone, right? It's like the first thing you do is just like write a simple example which shows you something. But what basically canvas is it's a simple drawing layer which allows you to create shapes within, it's a drawing API to create shapes within the browser. There are a bunch of great advantages of the canvas API. It's a bitmap API, so it draws directly to the browser. It's really fast. And you can see that dive into html5.org, that's pretty much where I clicked all the basic canvas support tags from. You can see most of the browsers pretty much support it. I think the canvas works. I've tried out some canvas examples on my iPad, and it works quite well. So in its elementary form, okay. That's a simple canvas API which I know. Okay. So this is a simple canvas example. As you can see, this is not an image, but it's a view image, but that's probably because it's a bitmap. Look at it. It's a canvas example. There's a canvas tag there. Can all of you see this? A very simple canvas tag which has height 500, width 500 with some JavaScript code which is attached to it. Okay. So you can see body on load, draw, there's a canvas. many of you couldn't hear me when I was not using it? How many of you are even listening to me? Alright, cool. Canvas in its, when I first looked at the Canvas idea, it reminded me of like learning how to do OpenGL programming. How many of you have tried that? Right? It's basically really elementary, allows you to draw a bunch of stuff. Allows you to like, also all the move tools look like logo. If you've ever used logo when you were in 6th standard B section. I was in 6th standard B section. Okay, so in the most simplistic form, Canvas just allows you to move to various points within the canvas and then draw shapes from there. So for instance, the first sector or a pie you see here, okay, is actually, oops, that one. Okay, so I say begin path, I say fill style is my gradient which I have defined there, which goes from white to whatever that orange color I have. Plus you draw an arc. Obviously the arc has two radiuses, it's both 250, so you get a uniform arc. It goes from 0 to minus 120 because it always goes that way. That's converting 120 to radians. And you obviously draw the lines after that to convert the whole thing into, let me just throw them into this. Okay, to convert to look exactly like this. Okay, so quite simple. Most of you can do this in like 20 minutes. We had an idea. So just called me on Monday, right? Just you called me on Monday, yeah. Monday just called me on Monday and said, dude, I can't find anyone to talk. So why don't you do a talk on Saturday? So our idea was, instead of doing a general talk which showed you some demos online, we thought we'll write something custom. We'll try to like pick something which we want to do and we'll try to write it and we'll try to figure out what worked, what did not work. So we start with the simple idea. We do 4 things where I work. We thought we'll create some sort of pie graph which shows those 4 things, right? And when you click on a segment in a pie graph, it kind of opens up and shows you what that part is. Shows you a basic description of that part. So within about 10-15 minutes of Canvas, I got the pie chart working, but there's a problem. The first problem you hit, right? I couldn't actually handle events on each part of the graph, right? Because Canvas by itself is a one single drawing API. You can't actually separate each part out and hand clicks on it. You can do it in a rudimentary way by using image maps, where you can put image maps on it and then do stuff on the image map, but it's not really elegant and it becomes really hacky really quickly. So at this point of time, okay, we said there are 2 approaches. We could look at a bunch of Canvas animation libraries which are there out there. One of them is called Cake Animation Library. It's quite good, have a look at that. The other one was called Raphael. Raphael is actually not a Canvas API, but it's a SVG based display engine. So we went from Canvas and said, okay, Canvas fits these 3 things, which is drawing shapes. But if you want to do something really involving or something which allows people to interact with what you're drawing, we couldn't use Canvas at all, right? So we went from doing using Canvas, which was pretty much what I call the unadulterated approach, because it's quite simple. I don't need to include a JS file; it just works, right? So that was attempt 1. So we went from there to use this SVG based library called Raphael. So SVG is part of most of the browser supports now, and the good thing about SVG is, so somebody was talking about CSS scaling, right? The SVGs by itself, if all of you know how it works, SVGs are vectors. They scale infinitely, both in the positive and the negative direction. So the advantage when you draw shapes is you can easily scale them down for a mobile display, for instance, and it just works, right? So for instance, the SVG support works on the iPad or on the iPhone or so. So this library basically allows you to draw and animate SVGs. So some cool examples are here. It scales, turns. I like the shape transformation stuff. So it basically takes a square and gradually makes it into a triangle. Does that with. So So those are some of the transformations. This is the square wave to an infinity thing, and so on. Okay, so we said, okay, this sounds most suitable for that work we were trying to do. So let's try to see how Raphael works. We wrote an example as well. So we got around to writing this much of it. But the basic idea is we got most of what we wanted working. So you'll see that works like you would see if you wrote this in Flash. Okay, I think the display has a problem with syncing with stuff really fast, so the animation doesn't show properly. So Akash helped me write this, so I'm going to get him to run through these slide decks because. Okay. Yeah.
SVG is scalable vector graphics and it is retail mode graphics. Give him the mic. Not your mic. SVG is scalable vector graphics and unlike Canvas, it is retail mode graphics. I older versions of IE don't support SVGs. They support something called VML. Okay. Now the advantage with SVG is that it comes as HTML tags. You have polyline, you have circle, you have rectangle, and something like that. It is part of the DOM tree. In Canvas, you have only one Canvas tag, and you have to manipulate it with JavaScript. With SVG, you get access to each element, and you can manipulate the DOM tree using your normal JavaScript libraries like prototype or jQuery or something like that. So.
Okay. You want to do the run through the code?
Demo, yeah. So this is the code of that demo that Shreyas showed you. Like I said, the project has a problem with syncing, so don't mind that. This uses a library called Raphael. Raphael is used to write SVG very easily.
So just to give you some, how many of you know how a SVG element looks like? Okay, let me just quickly show you. I think that gives you a bit of context. So that's, if you ever use Inkscape or one of those vector tools which allows you to create vectors, right? Vectors are actually paths defined within the file. So if you use something like Inkscape, create a file, then Emacs, open it, it will show you a bunch of paths which are created inside it. So for instance, a vector element would look something like that, where it says move to 100, 100, draw a line from there to this point, and so on. So it's actually a description language which allows you to describe paths, and the browser basically interprets that and draws that onto the screen, right? So for instance, this is translated to this within the browser. So you'll see that this is stored within the SVG tag. This SVG tag is created by Raphael, which has all the paths which we have defined. So it says draw L to 120, L and so on. So that string is what defines what gets drawn on stage.
Also, don't try to debug this with the Firefox. It highlights only the bounding boxes when you pour over the elements. And there is something called sets in Raphael. You can push each path or object like a circle or a rectangle, each primitive, and then you can call operations on top of the set. So it becomes simpler to manage your objects. Unlike Canvas, you can assign events like click, mouse over to each SVG element, since it is again a normal tag. You can do this using jQuery also, but Raphael provides methods for this.
Alright, simple run through of the code again, just so you know. So these defines the various tags we are doing. Each one is a segment in itself. What basically happens is we pick up the paths here and create a set. Paper is the primitive used in Raphael. So we create a set and push each element onto the set, and then we can access each set using some action handlers. So what happens is this set, for instance, when I close it, you'll see that primitives gets changed within the library itself. So you can see when I click here, things get updated here and things move on. So basically what Raphael really does is, versus giving you a canvas to draw on, it actually allows you to create an SVG element. The great thing about this SVG element is you can actually export it. You can probably export the SVG which you create on the browser side onto a PNG, right? So think of it if you want to build an icon maker, right? If you want to build a simple icon maker on the web where people can draw in shapes, add gradients to it, and then export that onto a PNG to make their icons, or even export it to some sort of, obviously you can export it to an SVG because it's stored in SVG in memory.
There is a thread on the Google groups of Raphael.js. I read this thread yesterday. It says, a guy wanted to export Inkscape based SVGs to his browser. So he said, can I import it by path? And I think it's possible. Someone has written a plugin for that. So here on you can just draw everything in your SVG stuff and then import it as text format. SVGs of course, HTML tags, so it implies text.
Right, so that's what we're trying to do. So this is pretty much close to what we wanted to do. Still not there yet, but we're getting there. We obviously can do gradients and overlaps and more fancy stuff. So that was the dance part. Does anyone have anything to say about that part? Any of your own experiences with doing?
Guys, can you use the mic? Can't hear you.
So my question is, do we have to necessarily use the SVG tag, or can we just use it as an event which has SVG?
No, you have to use it as an SVG tag.
Yeah. No, what the point I'm trying to make is.
Yeah, if you use IMG as a tag, it's not a vector at all.
Yeah, sure, but I think there's been some work even before HTML5 where people have created.
HasGeek is actually 10 years old.
Yeah,
so
sure.
this has been in the browser. In IE there was VML, and in other browsers SVGs for a while. So vector rendering was kind of possible, but it started to sort of standardize in the last few years, and they put it under the HTML5 sort of umbrella, but it really isn't the HTML5 tag, it's the SVG.
So the SVG tag is actually not defined by HTML5, is that?
No, it's defined by a separate W3C spec just for SVG. Or,
Yeah, you needed the Adobe SVG viewer first to
Cool, I think we'll...
if you want some alternate tools except Raphael.js, there's also something called ProtoWiz that is done by Stanford. You can look that up on Google and find out.
There's an open source project called SVG Edit, and it's kind of like a paint type thing, but they're making it more advanced now for making SVGs visual.
Yeah.
So just go ahead and download the source and have a look.
Cool. So let me just show you. We're going to move on to the audio part. Does anyone else have anything to say about the visual part or Canvas? If you have something to ask, anyone? Alright, cool. So this is NH7's player. Okay. Obviously, there you go. Okay, most of you know that audio and video in HTML5 is actually very simple, right? You just say audio, you say src and give the file name, and then you can say controls if you want the controls to be drawn in the browser, and the browser take care of it. Okay, but the problem is, audio is not as, audio and video pretty much have the same problems in HTML5. First of all, let me give you a quick run through. Unless what most people think, audio does not actually use the codec which is installed on your operating system. All the browsers come bundled with their own codecs. So if you're playing MP3 in your browser, it means there's an MP3 codec bundled with your browser. Which is why Chrome, for instance, plays MP3, but Firefox won't. Because Firefox culturally, they took a call that they won't support a patent encumbered format like MP4 or MPEG-LA, whatever you want to call it. So both audio and video is not really dependent on the operating system you're on at all. For instance, if you're on the Mac, right, and the Mac operating system by default supports AAC or H.264, but your browser still won't play it. Simply because the browser supports these codec engines within it. So if you're wondering why the download services of your browser keeps going up, that's a good way to see it. Just each one of these codecs adds up. Like WebM, right? WebM is a good example. Google launched this new codec. Comes bundled only with Chrome. But you're downloading that codec when you use it, and doesn't mean when you open VLC, Opera also has So there is a big fundamental problem here. The problem is you expect a WebM video to play in your browser, but it won't play in your VLC or it won't play in your media player because they all use different codecs to actually decode the video, right? And it's actually more complicated in video because video basically most of the video tags are container format. So AVI is a container, MP4 is a container. What MP4 inside the codec itself is Apple QuickTime codec. MP4 just acts as a container. So there are multiple containers. FLV is a container. Inside it might have H.264. There are multiple containers and multiple actual codecs inside these containers. So there is not one browser out there which supports all possible combinations of codecs and containers. So you'll always have to do a fallback mechanism. That's the biggest problem. The problem is I can put an audio source tag when you're building say an audio player or a video player. But the problem is if somebody doesn't have that codec, okay, then you have to default back to Flash. Right? I mean, I think it's very funny we start speaking like default back to Flash, which just sounds really odd. But that is the biggest challenge right now when it comes to HTML and multimedia. What we do is there is a two-step process. You can re-encode your content into 3 different formats and put them all in an audio tag. You can say audio tag. You can say this is my MP3 content. This is my OGG content. This is my something else, whatever AAC H.264 content. And the browser will then smartly look at it and decide which one can I play that. But the problem is, as someone who actually manages tons of content, right? Like I have 5,000, 6,000 MP3s, and it keeps growing 100 MP3s a month. Encoding all these APIs and making sure that their up-to-date version just becomes a pain. Not that it's hard to do, it's probably one FFmpeg command in the command line. It's just not something you want to do. So what we really wanted to do when we started working with HTML, we really wanted to do HTML5. Simply because it works really well on my iPad, on my iPhone, and a lot of Android devices as well. It just works out of the box without doing too much work. But the biggest problem was how do you fall back nicely? How do you fall back to a place where people don't see a visual change? There's also an important thing, right? You go to a page and you have HTML5 and it looks a particular way. And then you come back and to another page where that codec is not supported and the Flash player looks completely different, right? Because you need to theme the Flash player exactly the way your CSS is themed. For instance, I can give you a demo. Okay, so this is a library which actually does HTML video and does a fallback onto Flash. Okay, I'll open demo.html. and look for the video tag. Okay, that's a bad idea. Okay, you can see the video tag there. The video tag is video ID blah blah blah, HTML.png, and the source is MP4. Right? So if you open this in Chrome, okay. Okay, that's how the video looks in Chrome. Okay, now we open the same video in I think it tries to fetch, so that's how the player looks in, you can see there's a marked difference in how the player looks, right? This is the most fundamental issue with HTML5 in audio video right now. You need to have a place where this works uniformly across different browsers, looks the same, okay, and for any normal person, it shouldn't feel different, because I don't think any user cares whether it's a HTML5 video or not. Obviously, there are certain advantages of doing HTML5 video, which I'll talk about a bit. So this was the fundamental problem we try to fix, make it manageable, so that, also there's a lot of other issues, right? Most of you would have seen if you need to write two particular different modules, you need to manage content differently, you need to manage iterations, we have playlists. So how do you manage across playlists and sync it with the Flash player and stuff? So we came up with a solution. The idea was you detect if the browser supports MP3. We decided we're only going to do MP3. We decided the player's going to check, the code JavaScript's going to check if the player supports MP3. If the player does support MP3, basically there's audio, you use the audio tag and load that, otherwise you default to Flash. But all the controls are always going to be drawn in JavaScript or drawn in HTML. So all the play, pause controls you see on screen are always drawn in HTML. And then you create a JavaScript hook which basically triggers whether it's a control inside the audio tag or inside Flash. So there's a bridge which needed to be written which figured it out. So for instance, let me show you that. Okay, so this is pretty much the place where we decide what we want to do. So there's an init player which actually looks at sniffs the codec to see what is there. If it thinks it can play the type, which is a thing, it decides whether it wants to do a bind player or if it wants to do a load Flash player. But the interesting stuff happens inside this. So even when you do a load Flash player or you do a load bind player, you actually return a class called playlister, which acts like a bridge. So what it basically does, it figures out if it's using Flash or not, and figures out whether it should actually call the related Flash function or whether it should call the related JavaScript function. So this is the part which is slightly easier to do in audio, because audio you don't actually need anything visible on screen. For instance, I had this problem the day we launched. Lots of people, a friend of mine called me and said, dude, your player is not working in my browser. I said, that's not possible, I've tested it everywhere. He's like, no, you said it's HTML5 player and it doesn't work. I said, what browser are you using? He said, Firefox. I said, Firefox doesn't play MP3. You should probably have Flash block on. So he did, but the point is my Flash file was actually 1 pixel by 1 pixel because I don't need to show it. So it was almost impossible for him to right click on it and unblock it, right? If anyone's used Flash block. So it was really confusing to explain to a lot of users that even though we're HTML5, they might have to unblock Flash if they're using Firefox. The problem is much more rampant when it gets to video. The problem with video is you have a big element on screen, right? And if you want to do controls for that video element in JavaScript, you can't obviously like make simple things like scroll up, auto vanish, have it floating in the middle of the screen unless you do something like an iframe, right, on the Flash. Or if you do, you can do some sort of div manipulation, but it never works really well. The only thing which works really, which I have seen, is if you put an iframe on it. But the problem then becomes how do you like move stuff, controls from an iframe to your JavaScript window, back to the control, and all such issues, right? So there are a bunch of people who are trying to fix this. We're trying to write a video player which actually defaults really nicely to Flash. Okay, and I'll show you some of the beautiful examples people have written. So one of the best examples I've seen is this project called Sublime Video. Right? Sublime Video is one of the, it shows you the first time you come here, it shows you why you need to use HTML5. For instance, that's possible. Right? Nothing to do with the video. It was nothing done in the video. It's basically on top of your video box. Okay? You can actually put another box because it's a HTML DOM element where you just set an alpha on it. You can just say this box has transparency this much and put it on the video and it just works. Right? And you move over and it looks like your screen just brightened up automatically when you mouse over the video, which is really nice. So if you look at this, so obviously for them it's important to show HTML5, so they probably encoded stuff into all the formats. So you can see that video, single video class Sublime with blah blah blah, and source there's a video MP4, video and WebM and video OGG. So they have actually done encoding into all formats. They still have a problem. What they actually do is they have multiple Flash files, all of them themed to their CSS equivalents. So what happens is every time you create a CSS theme for your player, you'll have to actually edit your Flash file to make it look like that, so that the fallback is elegant, right? Which I don't personally like because I don't even have a Flash editor, for instance. But the advantages are very obvious. The advantages are you can put probably a big like button on your video. You can make your video at, you've seen stuff like YouTube does comments, like when at various settings there are comments. You can do those within your site. You can just put like a JSON marker and every time the video hits there, you can pop up on the video without using a bunch of YouTube custom. I think they bought a company which did that. They bought a company which did subtitles on videos because that's how hard it was to manage it. You can do all that yourself, which is pretty cool. So a bunch of other people are trying to tackle this a bit differently. So the other one which I know is called Flow Player. This is a pretty popular player as well. All of these are paid players, by the way. You all have to pay money to get those. I am trying to put together a playlister and a bunch of this stuff and open source it. So if anyone, if you have spare time and want to work on it, just talk to me. We want to just put it out and allow people to use their own HTML5 fallback players. So these guys are trying to do something slightly more intelligent, in my opinion. What they're actually trying to do is, obviously you can't do a bunch of stuff like auto hide when you do the player in HTML. So what they're doing is they're doing a separate HTML controller and then exposing all the video player controls over JavaScript through a ActionScript JavaScript bridge, so that you just build only this part of your player. So for instance, if you see this, okay, so that's a JavaScript, that's a Flash file, which obviously is playing that video. and that's the control. So basically the control is written in HTML and can be themed in CSS, while the actual layer itself is in Flash. And if you open this on an iPad, it will automatically become a HTML player. So it actually chooses Flash first versus choosing HTML5 first. Obvious advantages: you can theme your player really quickly, fit your site's design easily. Problem is the play button. If you change the design, you'll have to edit. If you want to change this player, you again have to put something inside Flash to make it work well. So it's kind of, you can, but it never works properly.
Yeah. Layering between Flash.
Never works. The only thing layering between Flash and DOM, the only thing which works well is iframes. You can put your logo, like it's really simple to put an iframe div over and put your logo on it. But if you want to interact with it, it has to talk across to iframes, right? And it just becomes really messy. So, which is why, so this is I think is fairly acceptable for time being, but obviously we need to come across to a better solution to work across browsers going forward. So that's pretty much all of it. So just a simple run through of what supports what, which I think is really important. I think IE9 supporting MP3 plus AAC is like a huge boon, which essentially means that if everyone moves to IE9, when is that ever going to happen? Who uses IE6 here? I think, yeah. Somebody does in the world, I'm telling you. Huh? Yeah. Get out of here, man.
Everybody here probably uses it.
No, I know. Anyway, that's what I was trying to say. I was trying to say we're still quite a distance away from saying we'll just use HTML, video and audio, because there's still a large part of people who either use a format which the browser doesn't support, or just use really broken old browsers. So we have to do all this stuff. So a bunch of references. Videojs.com is open source, just to see how the video stuff works. Most of it is JavaScript anyway.
Just want to make a point here.
Yeah.
There's one more reason why people use Flash, because HTML video doesn't support live streaming. So you can't do live streaming using HTML video. Second basic.
What?
It also doesn't support devices yet. The spec doesn't support devices yet.
Yeah. And second part is, second and very important business decision is, like if you are a content provider, so you have these people, artists or on HTML5 you can just right click and save the video file, right?
Yeah, but you know what? We figured out another way to get out of it. We use Amazon's CloudFront to stream stuff, and that has a mode on the file system which says this is stream only. So even if you right click, you can't save the file. So yeah, people fix that differently, but I know what you mean. As far as live streaming is concerned, I don't think it's that big an issue. For instance, the QuickTime plugin does live streaming fine, right? And the QuickTime plugin actually uses. No. But the point is, it's not actually embedded into the browser. It's still a codec, right? That MP4 codec which QuickTime uses to live broadcast is what is natively supported on both browsers. The live streaming has, other than making sure packet synchronization works, right? There's nothing really complicated in playing a live stream because it's just an endless movie.
It's very complicated because it's a binary stream and you can't push from the server.
Correct. But for instance, we have solved that in a bunch of other applications. Like VLC solves it in a different way. Have you checked out how VLC does live stream?
Yeah. VLC does live stream.
Yeah.
But you can't do it in a HTTP, the protocol, which is a request response protocol.
Right.
It doesn't know streaming. They just write a header and just start streaming from whatever.
Exactly. It's
syncing has always been a problem.
right. Yeah. Okay. So that's about it. You can reach me at shreyas@oml.in and I'm twitter.com/shreyas. So any other questions? Anybody else needs to ask? Huh? I still have 15 minutes more. We can play music. Dude, there's no network, man. All of you have to get out the network for me to use the network.
Yeah, I have a.
Yeah, you can show it. There's a private network. Do you on the screen? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
It's still the same external Ethernet cable.
But that's not the problem, right? The problem is this. That's like maybe it works. What is looking up? I'll use OpenDNS. Done. Fail. Huh?
With Canvas. So, I was just listening to the comment about events not being handled in Canvas, and I just remembered that I had done something, I had hacked around that limitation like a long time ago. So, this is something I've done in Canvas. If the internet had worked, it would be live updating, but what this tracks is the Flickr contacts that I have, and it just keeps adding contacts as it fetches. I don't, maybe I should refresh on a different tab. No, the net is not. So, in this particular one, the fundamental issue I have with Canvas is that Canvas tag as such is not a DOM element of any sort. It is what as relevant as a image. The browser or the content you generate at runtime is the only content that is displayed. It is a programmable element. It is not exactly a DOM element that you generate on the server. It is a purely client-side element. So, which means that you're suffering from every little limitation that JavaScript has. For example, SVG, even though Shreyas was generating that with Raphael or whatever he was generating it with, it is potentially possible for you to generate it on the server side if your client doesn't support it, right? If somebody has no script running, it is still potentially possible for SVG to be loaded. Canvas completely breaks if you are not running JavaScript because there is no other way to program it, right? It is just a blank screen that you get a JavaScript API for. So whatever you put inside a Canvas tag never gets rendered. So yeah, this was something that pulled data from Flickr, pumped into something called GraphVis. I don't know how many of you have seen. It's a graph layout tool, and pumps out a JavaScript file which draws this. So instead of generating SVG on the server side, I just fell back to generating JavaScript on the server side, which does a node here, draw a node here, draw a node here. Each node has a region marked to it so that when a mouse over happens, it figures out what node was drawn in that point backwards in your JavaScript and tries to.
Your in-memory data structure is figuring out where that position is.
Yeah, so I have a hash. I have this divided into 32 by 32 grids. So whenever a mouse over happens in one grid, I will look up what object belongs to that grid and fire an event. So it is like a hash table which is hashed by X and Y.
So what, I'm just wondering if you draw multiple canvases on the browser.
Yeah.
And just do like a hot click on each canvas and then.
There is an element for it.
I know, I'm just wondering if that could work.
Let me see if I can connect. I have one of those too. So in my blog, I had a tag view just built like that. It looks like connected. Wait a second. I have a VPN on. Should kill that. Yeah, so this one had both VML and Canvas and SVG used. So that no matter what you use, it will render. Doesn't load. Anyway.
That's all internet problems.
Okay. I guess time's up, right?
We still have 10 minutes.
No.
If you get your data card, get it online.
You want this? Yeah, I have it. So far.
No. By the time I configure this, 10 minutes will be up.
No, it takes a minute.
So I write random JavaScript application. So for example, it's a complete auto solver in JavaScript. It's a nice language which gets a bad reputation.
That's all done on simple DB to reduce any dependence on MySQL. All the authoring stuff is done on MySQL. The authoring engine in the backend is extremely hands-on version of WordPress. It's WordPress like so we use easy to put extension. So at the Barcamp, if anyone was there, I did this thing called find new artists you've never heard of, which you probably should know. Let me see those MP3s I What? No, I don't need
You mentioned you standardize on MP3 as the audio format.
Yeah.
You standardize on one video format.
Yeah. Works in Chrome.
So you get WebKit support via that, and then everything else.
And Flash also supports it, which is probably the best decision I know. The only real problem is right now even embedding is a problem if you do HTML5 because most of my HTML5 layers are written in JS, and if you want to embed it somewhere else and they don't allow complement JS to run, that becomes a problem. Like I would really like to take my player and put it on Facebook, but it just won't work. Then I have to do Flash because they would rather trust binary blobs to run like on themselves. That's a big problem.
All these embedded type scenarios basically fail, right? Like no cross-domain policy.
There is no. I mean, there is a, but I haven't seen what is that. It's not extensively implemented. Exactly, it's not extensively implemented, and most of the what I am planning to use is this thing called O-embed. You guys know of it? So O-embed is a policy which is good thing to look up. It actually tells you when you embed your link onto another server, the server actually queries a particular script on your server to say what should this embed look like. Right? So I tried to do the JavaScript thing, actually defaulted back to Flash, but there is all sorts of issues there because like the corresponding metadata is not in Flash. And I have to like create a whole new way to pick up metadata in Flash. So I just gave up and otherwise now what I'm trying to do is at least on Twitter front-end support more like. So when you put n7.8/pentagram and if you click on my link and that sidebar opens, right, I can actually decide how that sidebar looks depending on my own setting. So that's really useful for Twitter. For Facebook I still don't know. What I'm planning to do is I'm planning to do like a tab for Facebook so artists can install their own stuff. Like they can have a tab which is all their NSF. I still think Flash is only a little bit. So I don't know. Any other questions? I think Twitter is the first person who's using it. No, what? What? Flickr uses O-embed?
Yeah, they were the first one.
But how? I mean, it doesn't make sense. Flickr uses O-embed when you are embed in Twitter, right? I mean, it's not like anyone's going to O-embed stuff onto Twitter. I mean, onto Flickr. No, that's what I'm saying. they support OMBed. The way OMBed works is anyone who supports OMBed, when they figure out a link, okay, you publish on a particular XML file on your server. It says these are my OMBed handlers. So it queries that OMBed script to say what you want to be displayed when this link is shown. And you can give it some sort of HTML which is formatted for it. So for instance, tomorrow I know the Twitter sidebar is 400 pixels long. I don't want to give my whole page there. I can format it and give it exactly what I want, which I think is really useful. So it also works on, I think, all the Twitter clients. I think CCA supports it, Info supports it.
So H264 versus WebM.
I don't know, man. I actually played around with WebM when they released it. I actually read all the docs which they put up which said why WebM is better than H264. But when you're watching their video, and as for, I have, first of all, HTML5 video has a problem with full screen. Other than Safari, no other browser can go full screen on video, right? Because your instance is limited by your browser. So only Safari does, because Safari is integrated into the Mac, so Safari goes full screen. But if you try going full screen on HTML video in Firefox, it will be limited to your So that is a big problem. WebM, I don't have been, everything I've seen in red looks good. But as of now, my point is, if I'm not going to display really high-res videos, why do I really care about a format? I just choose something which works for me. Yeah, but I have not seen the benchmark, but I what is the typical video size for P20 for it?
There's not enough quality that YouTube became popular.
What?
YouTube didn't become popular for the quality.
No, I understand. See, again, for instance, for Vimeo, right? If you're using the actual service which does say 1020p videos or high-res videos, it makes sense to use something which works. Like Vivo is a very popular music video service. It allows you to play music videos online. As in, it allows you to play, create playlists of, say, you can say, yeah. So for them, it is absolutely simple. You just go to the full screen mode and videos keep scrolling, and it's a beautiful experience. For them, it probably makes sense. The question is more important whether you go WebM or Info. For me, it's just, as a noted, tomorrow if it becomes important, I'm
Shreyas, if you guys are continuing, maybe you can take it.
No, we were doing it because we had
tea and coffee is served. You can take it offline. Offline is also the next session, along with geolocation and mobile. Offline. Thanks to Pradeep. Geolocation, offline and mobile is the next talk. Tea is served now. And if you want, there is one more energizer that I have in store. There is a nice connect and collaborate board outside. Please use it, see it, love it. What is it? Love it, learn it, use it, love it.